Hello everyone, my name is Kelly Alfrey and I am representing the F3 Future of Fish Feed team today with a presentation on a largemouth bass feeding trial that we recently ran with Texas A&M University. Before we get started, I'd like to recognize my co-authors, Dr. Ewan McLean, Dr. Delbert Gatlin, and Dr. Rick Barrows. The following presentation was created for the Aquaculture 2022 conference hosted by the World Aquaculture Society, and now we're recording the presentation to share with the Feed Innovation Network on fin.org. Before we dive into the largemouth bass trial specifics, I'd like to give a bit of background on our F3 initiative. As many of you know, fish meal and fish oil have historically represented the gold standard as aquafeed ingredients due to their excellent nutritional profiles. However, the uncertain future of wild fish stocks threatens not only fish meal and fish oil supply chains, but also the natural ecosystems that depend on forage fish. The more nutritionally equivalent ingredients feed formulators have to replace fish meal and fish oil, the better off ocean ecosystems will be, and the better suited the aquaculture industry will be to provide seafood to satisfy growing protein demands. So, the Future of Fish Feed, or F3 team, encourages innovation in the aquafeed ingredient sector. We're a collaborative effort between NGOs, researchers, and private partnerships attempting to accelerate the commercialization of ingredients to replace wild-caught fish. We carry out this mission through 3 different areas. First, the F3 Challenge, an industry competition to sell fish-free aquafeeds. Next, we host F3 meetings and webinars to facilitate networking and collaboration between ingredient suppliers, feed companies, farmers, and investors. These meetings give our challenge contestants the opportunity to connect with the rest of the industry and showcase their products. And finally, the Feed Innovation Network, or FIN. Through this network, we conduct independent research on alternative ingredients, like the research that I'm presenting today, and publish their formulas and corresponding data as open source on our FIN website. The idea behind our research is to provide the industry proof of concept and a base formula for including alternatives in diets for high-value species. On our website, we also share experimental protocols, ingredient supplier and feed information, as well as other resources to accelerate the evaluation and adoption of fish meal and fish oil substitutes. Through our research on demands for fish meal and fish oil, we identified largemouth bass as a species that could significantly benefit from alternative ingredients. The statistics support this. Around 432,000 metric tons of largemouth bass were produced globally in 2018, with 99% of that production coming from China. Largemouth bass has a high dietary protein requirement, which is generally supplied in the form of fish meal. Members of the F3 team visited farms in China prior to the pandemic and saw this firsthand. They also heard complaints from farmers about the rising cost of feed. Feed represents 60% of farming operational costs, and the price of fish meal, a major component of that cost, has risen 3.4 times in the last 20 years. So unless cheaper alternative protein-based diets emerge, this costly feed factor stands to impede sector growth. For this trial, we had 2 objectives. First was to demonstrate the potential for excluding fish meal and fish oil from largemouth bass feeds. The second objective was to compare the performance of our open source fish meal and fish oil free diet, what we call F3, against 2 commercial closed formulation largemouth bass feeds, Zin Zin, a diet from China, and Alltech Coppens from the Netherlands. The ingredient composition for the F3 diet can be seen here in this first table. We utilized a combination of wheat flour, poultry byproduct meal, hydrolyzed soy, and soy protein concentrate as our primary protein components to replace fish meal. For the fish oil substitution, we blended algal oil and canola oil. We have found that blending algal and vegetable oils enables us to meet fatty acid and lipid dietary requirements while creating a less expensive formulation compared to solely using algal oil. In the next 2 tables, you will find the approximate composition and fatty acid analysis of the 3 diets. You'll notice that the crude protein and lipid levels differ across treatments. While most of our research compares isonitrogenous and isolipidic formulas, For this trial, we were specifically interested in optimizing the nutrition of an experimental formula and comparing that to top commercial diets. One more note on the diets. Our trial included 5 other experimental diets that had the same base formula as the F3 diet, but varying amounts of vegetable oil and algal oil combinations to optimize fatty acid levels. However, for the sake of this presentation and our short time here, I'm focusing on the best performing experimental diet compared to the commercial diets. The full dataset on all diets may be found in our published paper and also on our f3fin.org website. For the trial setup, we used a recirculating aquaculture system including 110-liter aquaria. 20 fish were stocked per aquarium at an initial weight of about 15.2 grams, and we had 3 randomly assigned replicate aquaria per treatment. Over 10 weeks, fish were fed twice daily and allowed to consume as much feed as they wanted for 5 minutes each time. This allowed the fish to be fed at a rate close to apparent satiation without overfeeding, and it enabled accurate calculation of FCR. To measure performance metrics, fish were weighed as a group every 3 weeks to monitor weight gain and FCR. Fortunately for us, during week 6, biomass limits were reached, and so 4 fish of average weight were removed from each aquarium to reduce the density to an acceptable level. At the end of the trial, fish were again sampled and additional parameters were measured, which we will discuss on the next slide. So here are the results. Water quality parameters across all treatments were equal, so averages and standard deviations are presented here. Parameters across all tanks stayed within acceptable levels established for largemouth bass. Looking at the production performance, the F3 diet outperformed both commercial diets in terms of weight gain and survival, though the differences were not significant between the F3 feed and the Zinzin feed. The growth seen here for the F3 and Zinzin treatments represents an increase in weight of over 300%. We see a similar trend in survival, where F3 and Zinzin showed excellent survival, significantly higher than the Alltech Coppens group. Other parameters, including FCR, fillet yield, hepatosomatic index, intraperitoneal fat ratio, and condition factor, all did not differ significantly across treatments. We were somewhat surprised by these results, because it has previously been reported that largemouth bass respond positively to increasing levels of dietary lipid by showing increased weight gain and improved feed efficiency. While this could explain the differences between the F3 and Zinzin diet performance, where F3 had more lipid and less protein than Zinzin, the decreased weight gain and survival of the Alltech Coppens group, which had the most lipid and least protein, combined with the equivalent FCR values, really challenges this assumption. From an F3 perspective, these results are really promising. Our hope is to find alternative ingredients that can perform just as well as traditional ingredients like fish meal and fish oil, and that is exactly what we see here. Following sampling at week 10, the remaining fish from 3 replicate aquaria were consolidated into 2 aquaria and fed their experimental diets for an additional 2 weeks. During this period, at 3-day intervals, fish were stripped and fecal samples were collected approximately 5 hours after feeding. Samples were dried and pulled over time as 1 composite sample per aquarium and used to obtain the digestibility parameters listed in the table here on the left. Apparent digestibility coefficients for organic matter, crude protein, crude lipid, and gross energy, as well as phosphorus availability, were all relatively high and generally similar among treatments. After week 10 and prior to the 2-week digestibility trial, 3 fish per aquarium were homogenized as a composite sample and analyzed for approximate composition. Differences in whole body protein, lipid, and ash can be seen in the table here on the right. The most significant differences are seen in crude protein and lipid levels, where the Alltech Coppens group showed lower protein and higher lipid levels compared to the other 2 groups. This likely reflects the dietary level differences that I mentioned before. In summary, this trial demonstrated that performance metrics including weight gain, FCR, and survival for the F3 feed were equal to or better than two major commercial feeds. Apparent digestibility coefficients and phosphorus availability were equal across treatments. And a point that we're really excited about, complete replacement of fish meal and fish oil is possible in diets for largemouth bass. The results for this trial have been published in Aquaculture Research, and the data and formulas have been published as open source material on the f3fin.org website as well. So thanks for viewing this presentation. I would also like to thank the F3 team and Texas A&M for giving me the opportunity to present this research, and also thank our partners who helped facilitate the trial.